starting from the end is Dr. Leo Celli. Some of you may know him from previous years, but also he leads a series of datathons around the world. I'm so glad that he and I actually will partner up for China next year. We finally got our calendars synced. So we're going to be doing both AI Med and a datathon in Beijing next year. And then I showed a picture of Karen at the introduction, someone I met in Toronto, and she's available to talk to us about Canada. And then Jack Lee is going to talk about Asia and Taipei. And to my left is Dr. Zhang, who I had the pleasure of knowing from being in China several times last year. So we cover a lot of countries, and we thought we'd just start with a brief introduction from my slides to set the framework, and then we're going to try something new. We're just going to sit and present our 1 slide or 2 slides, and then just continue a conversation. So everyone has an opportunity to jump in whenever, all right? Is that good for my speakers? Okay. So just to set the framework for everybody here. So this is the AI map. So when you look at who's doing a lot of AI in terms of startups, so this is basically in terms of startups, and you see basically North America. There's some activity in South America. You see activity in the EU, particularly the UK, although countries like Spain and France are also doing quite a bit of AI work. And then when you go into Asia, it's China, India, and a lot of the countries in Southeast Asia as well, and Australia. And I just want to also mention Israel is always very high up on the list in terms of AI startups. And these are, some of you are from probably one of these cities. These are sort of deemed to be the top 10 or 12 hubs for AI, and basically California, New York, and you can see the rest of the cities. And we've had probably going to be able to make it to all of these cities in the next couple of years with this particular meeting. So the superpowers, so when you compare, the countries are very much in the academic realm of artificial intelligence. On the left is a graph that shows the number of publications, and in percentage is the references that are in different journals. In other words, the higher the percent number, the higher likelihood that articles are mentioned in other journals. So sort of non-biased, in a non-biased way. On the right is an academic index for artificial intelligence publications, and the US still has the lead there, but I have to say other countries are catching up very quickly. And what about investments? So China has now superseded the US in terms of absolute dollars or yuan going into investments in artificial intelligence. And, but pretty much US and China still holds most of the capital for investing into companies as well as research. US versus China in terms of different areas is sort of an interesting comparison. While the US has the lead in terms of startups in natural language processing, which is how computers communicate with humans, as well as machine and deep learning, China has the edge in robots and facial recognition. So there are different areas that are sort of closing in on each other between the two countries in artificial intelligence. So what I did for a meeting earlier this year is to set aside 5 categories and how these countries compare. So I give a star for the country that I think is a little bit ahead of the other 2, or at least comparable. So when you look at healthcare data, so that's a broad category obviously, but I'm talking about amount of data, access to data, quality of data. I have to give China and the UK stars, because China for the amount of data potentially they can have, although it's still relatively fragmented. The UK for its national directive with the NHS. The US still needs some work on just having access to data. So access need, I'm defining as how badly do you need to access a clinician for healthcare. And China, those of you who've been to China, it's not an exaggeration to say that even when you have access to a clinician, you sometimes get as little as 3 to 5 minutes for that clinician. So just in terms of numbers and volumes of patients that need to be seen, China will have, I think, a superior incentive to have other modes of delivering healthcare, particularly AI-enabled mechanisms. So AI Manpower, I think the US does have the lead in terms of just the number of researchers, number of graduates available, although China's catching up very quickly. I think in the next 5 years, you'll see China catching up to the US. AI academics, I think all 3 countries deserve a star for the amount of publications, influence on the rest of the world in terms of publications. And the last category is government support. So I think, at least with the present administration in the US, we're not sort of getting a public recognition for how important AI is, particularly in healthcare, but certainly what we're hearing from China and the UK is they're putting a lot of emphasis on not just AI, but AI efforts in healthcare. Both government leaders have declared this as a national priority. So with that, we're gonna go around in whatever order, and I've asked each speaker to have 1 or 2 slides if they like, just as adding to the framework of artificial intelligence around the world. So,
I guess we
that's
go
yours,
by
Leo?
whichever
Okay.
slide comes first.
Yeah, sure.
So I represent a consortium called MIT Critical Data. It's a consortium of clinicians, computer scientists, and engineers who are all interested in leveraging data that is routinely collected in the process of care. And as Anthony mentioned, we organize these events called Datathons, which is actually short for data hackathons, during which time we give the participants really a taste of what AI research is. So you interface the healthcare providers with data scientists, and over a span of a weekend, they work on a clinical project. We offer 2 of the databases that our group has developed, which are both publicly available. So the MIMIC database is an ICU repository coming from Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. And then there's the Philips EICU collaborative research database with ICU admissions from more than 200 hospitals across the United States. And it's an opportunity to get the people excited about AI. And then we invite leadership from the hospitals, and they observe that, they become, really encouraged by what they see between the interaction between the clinicians and the data scientists. And they start working on creating their own MIMIC and EICU database. So one of the objectives of this event is really to convince people that for AI to really prosper, the main ingredient is data. And this is why I brought up these slides. These are the 3 steps in terms of moving the field forward. And the first one is data collection and curation. The second one is machine learning and artificial intelligence, which is kind of getting all the attention now. And the last one is bringing the algorithms to the bedside or policymakers. And as you could see from the photos right next to the phrases, the second part, which is what we're excited about, is the easiest part. Yeah. As a group, we focus our efforts 90% to data collection and curation. Everywhere you go, people say, oh, we have a lot of health-related data. And then you go there, this data is not really adequate for machine learning. You don't have relevant outcomes in here. For this data to be useful, you need to interface it with other data sets. And data integration, data harmonization are both non-trivial tasks. And to be able to do that, you need to bring in the people who are very familiar with the way that the data is collected. And this is the reason why we decided to make our databases open access. If we had been the ones who would curate MIMIC and EICU, it would take us decades to identify cohorts, to identify concepts. There are millions of concepts that you need to be able to perform AI research. And with both MIMIC and EICU being completely open access, we're taking advantage of close to 10,000 people who are really helping in terms of curating the data. Because the pre-processing part of the data before you could perform machine learning is just a brutal task. And this needs to be shared, this needs to be made open so that there's consistency in the way people are developing models using this data.
So Leo, you're absolutely right. And for those of you who don't do this work day in, day out, literally 90% of your effort and time is spent, and I learned this the hard way when I was going through school, is the data collection, curation, access. The AI is almost like your big reward at the very end, and it takes only 5 to 10% of the time, as Leo said. So I'm not going to put you on the spot and tell us, so you travel all over, which countries has the worst, but what are a few countries that you think are really far ahead in terms of the data organization and access and availability? What are a few countries that are really ahead of the rest of the pack?
So we're excited about 301, which is the hospital where Chengbo represents. They have over 1 to 2 years, they put together their own version of Mimic. And I could say that with the size of 301, they've already outsized Mimic just because it's a 4,000-bed hospital. We're very excited about our partners in Brazil and in Spain, as well as in Australia, who are also have put together their own ICU databases. And of course, Taiwan is far ahead in terms of having really an electronic medical record that is implemented across the country. But we've had issues with trying to access the NHI database from Taiwan, and I'm sure Jack will tell you more about the Taiwanese health database.
What's nice in some countries, like I think in some hospitals I visited in China, actually they haven't developed a robust EHR yet. It's almost good because instead of re-engineering something that's there, like in the US, you can actually start from scratch with something that's AI friendly as a database and complete, and the way you really would design the database from an AI perspective, which is different than here. We always have to, I feel like I'm constantly re-engineering things because things aren't really well designed for AI, so really good.
And then the last part is just, again, the purpose of AI research is not for them to languish as citations in PubMed. They need to be brought to the policymakers. They need to be brought to the clinicians so that they could use them at the front lines of care. But that is just as challenging as the first part because you're going to have to really know about change management. You're going to have to work with industrial engineers and UI UX experience to be able to make these algorithms incorporated as smoothly as possible. And I think we need the community to not just focus on the machine learning and AI part, but to really invest some money, some resources to the first and third part.
Yeah, Mimic is, that Leo's part of, is just an amazing pioneering work in this area, taking ICU database and introducing data science. And it's very intimidating when you look at the entire program, how amazing it is. But I think, for those of you who are interested, you can start small. Just get to know a data scientist, bring that person into your practice or your rounds, and start just talking about data science. I think, you don't have to go all the way to something that Mimic is capable of doing right off the bat. You can just start small and learn about data science ironically, with another human being. So let's see who's next on the slides. Karen from Canada, Toronto.
Can you hear me? No.
Yes.
Yeah, good. So I'm actually, Mimoza really represents about, I guess, all 43 years of my life. So it's a personal story. So I'm a surgeon. I'm a plastic surgeon in Toronto, Canada. I'm also a scientist. So I have a PhD in optical imaging and tissue physiology. I'm the CEO as well of this company. But I also have a personal story. And that personal story is really with respect to my family. So as a surgeon, as a plastic surgeon, I see people from all over Canada with complex tissue injury. I also see pediatric patients that come. I have both pediatric and adult practice as well. As a scientist, I've been studying novel biomarkers for tissue viability. So if you start to see these biomarkers in the skin, we can actually predict their outcome. And I've been doing that now for about 15 years. I decided to start a company because I realized that these big, huge pieces of tech that I was building in my lab were actually valuable to anybody because they weren't portable. So it was great in a university environment, it's great in my hospital environment, but we actually needed to get this hardware into the hands of people, so the frontline workers into the hands of patients. And it really resonated with me when I heard the family speak this morning, Hannah's mom especially, when she spoke about wanting to know more about her health and being a part of that piece with her physician. And that's essentially why we created the company Mimoza. What is Mimoza? Well, it's essentially a piece of hardware. So we've scaled these 14, 15 foot pieces of tech that are essentially multispectral imaging pieces of technology, scale them down into a handheld device. That handheld device looks below the surface of the skin at those novel biomarkers. If we start to see those biomarkers, we can actually predict if there's tissue death in hours to days down the road. What are we currently doing with this in Canada? My specialty is in the reconstruction of the lower extremity. People who have diabetes, they get wounds of their feet. If they get wounds of their feet, they're high risk for amputation. The problem is you need to see them within the golden window. The golden window is anywhere between 14 days to 52 days after they have that little blister. If you don't see them to host that intervention, that being an endovascular technique to restore blood flow or an open bypass, they're actually every day afterwards high risk for amps. In Canada, we have a huge country. A lot of it's rural. There's a disparity in terms of access to care. If you do not live within an urban setting, you are 2 to 3 times more likely to have that amputation. The same is also true here in America. And it's mainly because you don't have access to someone like myself or someone who can host that intervention. So essentially having that portable tool that you can give to your remote location, to your frontline workers to screen people for those novel biomarkers, sort of create that alert, and that alert then sends something back to their primary care physician and bring them into the urban center to host their intervention. How does AI play into what we're doing? Well, firstly, we're the only tissue or non-invasive data bank that exists globally with respect to multispectral imaging. We are using these biomarkers in a predictive way to say, okay, how can we predict their outcome and how can we learn from that outcome? And then building on what Leo said is that a training set, it doesn't add value, or it's not valuable unless you actually have good outcome measures. So every image is tied into what's existing with the patient. And we've had to build that actually from scratch. So it's taken us a long time, but we actually have a huge data bank, not just in the diabetic lower extremity, but in other areas where tissue viability may be critical. This is just a small snapshot of what I'm doing, but there's a lot of expertise in AI in Canada, and Anthony knows as he just visited with us. In fact, in the Toronto-Waterloo quarter, we're known as the Silicon Valley of Canada. So AI is pretty prominent. We have lots of access with physicians. I'm just a small example of what's happening there, and I can speak more to the Canadian experience as we have our panel discussion.
I really love Karen's story because she kind of wandered into the AI territory and just had a big problem that you need to be solved, right? So I think one perhaps takeaway from here, if you're here for the first time, is to think of AI as a new resource, a new way of thinking about solving a problem that traditional means haven't been able to solve. So AI is not about coding only, it's not about deep learning, it's about just using available technology and resources to solve a problem. And it's not, and also AI doesn't come in one form. It comes in multiple forms. There's convergence of, Kevin didn't have a chance to talk about it in detail, but he's particularly good at using natural language processing and medical image computer vision as a way to solve problems that clinicians have. So you'll see this portfolio of AI tools used in combinations to solve problems that are difficult to tackle. So Jack, and tell us what's happening in Canada. So I had an amazing visit to Toronto, and just a level of passion, enthusiasm, and what's happening in Canada right now in terms of AI startups and projects.
Right, so we have a huge number of startups currently in the space. The federal government, so our national governing body, actually supports AI. So we have a federal government plan to promote AI in healthcare. Ontario is probably our largest, which is one of our provinces. AI Hub, we have an accelerator center fully dedicated to machine learning to pump out companies that will translate tech into the healthcare space. A significant amount of funding for AI. Things related to drug discovery, genomic data, whether we can predict wound healing with bacterial profiling. There's something in every space in the healthcare environment. And I think as well, implementation is easier because we're a little smaller, it's a little condensed, and people are really open to embracing AI in our country.
I was very impressed with what I saw there in such a short time. And, you know, Canadians in general are just more humble and more good-natured. They don't brag about anything. And at the same time, they're doing amazing work. And we typically get a couple of dozen Canadians here. So it's an amazing center, country that's doing a lot of work, but just not kind of bragging about it. So, Jack, what's going on in Taipei?
All right.
While we're doing that, we have probably about 25 countries represented here, so I think we're going to have some live mics available during the Q&A. So feel free to contribute to the discussion about things on the international front. So when we were in London, we had amazing discussion from countries like Senegal, Israel. They're just doing amazing work. So we'll have that session available.
Yeah, apparently the slide's on, not on our screen, but I don't need to look at it. I'm Jack Lee from Taipei. I'm used to be, I'm also the past president of the Asia Pacific Association for Medical Informatics. All this talk about AI in medical images, radiology, drug discovery, bioinformatics, and genes, I think these are exciting. However, in the Asia Pacific area, in some of the developing countries, I think there are lower hanging fruits for AI in healthcare. For examples, I'm just giving 4 examples here. The first one is medical errors. It's the third most common cause of death in the US, of course, only next to cancer and heart disease. And it's killing 250,000 people a year in the US alone.
Now, is that true for some of the Asian countries as well, or is it a unique American phenomenon?
No, it's only worse.
Worse, the higher up on the list.
American is one of the few countries in the world who's able to face the problem.
Okay.
But in
So
most
you actually
countries,
don't know the numbers, perhaps, in some Asian countries?
yeah, what I can say is that in terms of medication errors, for example, the error rate for each prescriptions, which for example, in Taiwan, we issue about 360 million prescriptions a year. In China, 8 billion a year. And the error rate of that kind of medication prescriptions will be 5 to 8%. Imagine that percentage multiplied by billions. That's the kind of errors that we're making every day, and we're giving these drugs to our patients. Yeah. Okay, so I think there are a lot AI can do in terms of preventing medical errors. The good thing about it, I mean, the bad thing is that's killing a lot of people, but the good thing, the other side of the story is that 50% of these errors are preventable, according to the research. But they are preventable only by smart mechanisms, in which AI can do a lot. And the second topic I'm bringing to the table is poor and inconsistent quality. According to many major medical journals, including New England Journal of Medicine and JAMA, 45% of the population did not get standard care, and that's in the US alone. I think in the Asia Pacific, it's only worse, like 60% did not get standard care. That's the number from US and Australia. So protocol and guidelines are not enforced at the same time, at the right time to the right person. And I think AI can do amazing work by enforcing smart guidelines and protocols. Also, one-size-fits-all approach in medicine. We are living in a healthcare system that's pretty much based on, a medical record that's invented 2,500 years ago, and the type of practice are still way like several hundred years ago, before we even have computers. Yeah. So the whole medical practice hinges on average, meaning if you have a liver function like GOT, if it's 39, it's normal. If you're 41, you have a liver problem, right? But then out of thousands of lab tests we're doing, we're hinging on only average, and that's because we're not fully utilizing AI in all the medical practice. Yep. Imagine we're like in a stone area of healthcare. I mean, in terms of numbers that we process.
Yeah.
So there's so many opportunities. And the last one will be ineffective prevention, because look at the influenza vaccination shot. In Taiwan, where we give influenza vaccination for people older than 65 and younger than 12 for free. All the other people, you have to pay out of pocket to do it. But who's to say that everybody who's older than 65 have the same risk against influenza? And there are people who's 85 and still working still very active. There are people who's 60 and very sick.
Yeah.
So we're not actually really looking at the risk. And that's why we don't have very effective prevention program in any aspect of the healthcare. So we really need AI to give us accurate, personalized, individual risk estimates before we can have effective prevention. And now we're getting more into the actionable predictions, right? One example about not very useful prediction will be, I predict in 100 years, everybody in this room will die. That's very accurate, but that's not useful. Mm-hmm. And it's not actionable. Well, probably actionable a little bit, I don't know. But meaning we need AI to produce very effective and useful risk estimates that's actionable. For example, if I'm a high-risk person for, let's say, hepatoma, which is a big problem in the Asia-Pacific area, then my examination for liver sonogram may not be every 12 months. It may be 6 months or 3 months, maybe, right? For people who is not at risk for hepatoma, their routine sonogram, liver sonogram exam could be 24 months, 48 months. But what we're doing now is that if you have something, you're 6 months. If you don't, you're 12 months or never, right? Mammogram for everybody who's older than 45 every 2 years. I mean, so how do you know that every woman that's over 45 suffer the same risk of breast cancer? They don't.
Yeah. So we're sort of, with the present situations, we're sort of in the worst of both worlds. We're not doing the basics very well, it sounds like. Mm-hmm. Just simple safety issues, quality issues. And on the other hand, we're nowhere close to what we all like to see in our lifetime, which is precision care, whether they're in the ICU or in a primary care situation, and we're nowhere close to that. So hopefully with AI tools, there eventually will be more and more available that we can kind of take on both fronts, right? So.
Exactly. Every time I come to LA, I'm very impressed with the traffic jam. Okay? With all the talks about smart transportation, yeah. IoT, and real-time transportation network, we're still suffering from the traffic jam. And this is like the traffic jam in healthcare.
Yeah.
There are so many basic problems that we haven't actually been able to improve. And with a little bit of smart technology, not even CNN or RNN, we could probably solve a lot of these problems. So I would urge people to look at these problems and maybe to urge your government to invest on some of these problems.
Yeah, I think a key point you just mentioned is not all the tough problems in healthcare needs deep learning, and yet a lot of money is invested in deep learning. We just need some straightforward, robotic process automation probably to take care of some of the administrative issues, and yet we're all distracted by the shiniest, thing, that's available. So we talked a little bit about China. So what's your perspective on China, working in China as a data scientist in a very, very big hospital? What sorts of problems are you seeing on the ground that is important for us to know what's happening in China?
Yes, I'm Zhengbo Zhang from China. Thank you for having me. I'm IT critical data conference and data science.
So how many beds you have in your hospital? How many beds?
There are almost over 8,000 beds.
Over 8,000 beds.
Yeah,
okay.
in our hospital.
So that's a lot of data coming in every day. So do you have a data science department yet or a division?
Yeah, sure. In 2016, our department set up a new department. It's called the Medical Big Data Center.
Okay.
There are almost 40 staff in our hospital working. 40 staff
Okay.
in
That's
that
impressive.
Department working on the big data analysis. Yeah.
Okay. And what sorts of early results are you seeing from your group? Or are you still spending a lot of time on the data curation, data organization part, probably? Or are you seeing analytics coming out already?
I think to implement AI in medicine, the first step is that you should have a high quality data sets. So the first step for us is to build up our own version of, just as Leo said, our version of Mimic database. Currently, we have built up our own ICU databases. And also, there are some ongoing projects about how to use that kind of database. Yeah, there are several projects under development.
Hopefully, some of the clinicians here will experience a datathon. We'll maybe try to bring it here next year, Leo. Is an amazing phenomenon. You see clinicians, I had the privilege of helping Leo with one, sitting next to data scientists, literally working on research type questions from a clinical perspective and getting the answer for a change, as opposed to reading publications that say more studies are warranted, which is almost always now the case. So it's a totally different brand of quote unquote research, or just getting answers to questions that have been asked for decades without an answer, right? So, so we have a lot of countries represented, and again, do we have live mics available for the audience from different countries? Feel free to raise your hand or let us know so we can get the mics to you from different countries if you have comments or questions from all of us. So what do you see in the near future for your geographical area that you're excited about for 2019 and onward? What do you see happening? Leo, maybe you go to Europe frequently as well. What do you see happening in the EU and the UK for the next few years?
So as people know, there has been a recent development in Europe. So the GDPR was formally enforced this past May, and they have very strict regulations about data sharing. I mean, the regulations are actually similar, but the fines are so steep that it would really rattle any company that are thinking about exploring databases and sort of sharing it so that it will be available to more data scientists. And there are concerns that the GDPR is actually going to slow down the momentum of AI research, and we're hoping that that's not the case. So hopefully over the next few years there will be more clarity in terms of the implementation of GDPR, and maybe we could continue on with the progress that we see in AI research in Europe.
What do you see in Canada next couple of years?
I think we have a huge infrastructure right now that's reaching out into our rural communities with our telehealth. So telehealth actually was created in Canada and then disseminated. And I think you're going to start to see AI embrace that telehealth so that we can reach the rural communities or communities that are underserviced. So I'm from a small place in Canada called Newfoundland. I'm from a tiny community of only 1,000 people. They don't have a doctor. So now you're going to be able to have these virtual doctors screening people using AI and then getting them in to see the people. And I think the second thing is efficiency within the system. So the AI is going to allow us to refer people to the right person at the right time, because I think there's a lot of inefficiency in the system.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned the access issue, because in previous years, and I think this year also, we'll start talking about global health solutions that we can use AI for too. It's not just for countries with big volumes and big problems. It's also for global health related issues as well. Jack, what do you see in the Asia Pacific as a trend for the next couple of years?
There's always a healthcare cost pressure growing in this whole area about the government want to invest more money into. So I think healthcare efficiency and cheaper access to healthcare is still a priority for AI in this area. And if we can eliminate more medical errors by the way, that would be very interesting.
I've already met people coming from Korea, Japan, and very more than curious about all of this and actually are implementing analytics already in particularly ICU setting in Tokyo, let's say, and also Korea. So I think as we get more and more sophisticated and more mature as a domain, I see a lot of interesting developments in those countries as well. So what's coming up for China next year or two?
So I think there will be more and more clinicians and data scientists working together in the field of medical data analytics. And also, I believe that AI will play more and more important roles in China, especially in the underdeveloping area for
access, yeah.
Especially for clinicians and doctors who need support from AI tools to help them to the diagnosis and the treatment. Yeah.
Maybe we can have the lights up and maybe we can get the audience involved with mics, and if there are tweets that we can handle as a question. Can we have the lights up so we can see everybody? And I know we have a lot of countries represented. I know in the beginning everyone's always a little bit shy, but any questions from, can we have the stage lights down and the house lights up?
Not right this second. They're going to just sort out the lighting state in 1 moment.
Okay, it's just hard to see who's, okay. Any questions out there from anyone? Yes, in the front.
Thanks, Anthony and Leo. The question is, amongst which countries do you see maximum interaction occurring between clinicians and the data scientists? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay. It's a tough question, Leo.
It's hard to say. I think we're all at the same level. I would say that both professions are inherently very arrogant professions. They always want to be the smartest in the room, and which makes it very challenging for them to work in a place where they don't understand some of the jargon. And that's really one of the objectives that we're trying to address with our events, is to make them feel comfortable with each other, make them really realize that they could achieve so much more if they take advantage of each other's expertise. And I think the main factor that will affect the blending of the clinicians and the data scientists would be training. So we need to start training the next generation of clinicians, the next generation of data scientists to be more collaborative. And for now, the way the curriculums are developed, it's not really towards that goal.
It's also encouraging that we're starting to see younger clinicians usually interested in taking this on. So, and I think having dual education will hopefully create an interface between these two big groups. So do you see the hubris in these groups? Is that global, universal, everywhere?
Yes.
No country is spare from hubris in these two domains. Okay, okay. I actually think the Chinese data scientists are very humble, but okay. Yes?
Of
Can we
course,
use a microphone? Yeah, let's use a microphone because it's hard to, Linda.
we have
okay.
about 4 or 5 questions lined up.
Yeah.
People are standing around. So
Just shout because I can't see you. Okay.
Sorry, Linda. I want to follow up on that point, and I want to go a step further. I agree 100%, Tony. Training is necessary, cross-training. But I believe that the clinician, the clinical expert, actually have to take the driver's seat. Because data science is a tool, is a discipline. There are questions, there are analytics that's absolutely in that domain. But when it comes to delivery healthcare, medicine, our experts are clinicians. I don't think they're trained right. They don't have the skill set to really use data. That's where we need to focus on. But it's not about replacing them. And so I really think, and in all the projects I've seen, if we don't put the clinical expert up front and center and let them be at the driver's seat, not just collaborating. I'm sorry. We don't always have identical approach, and every methodology has a trade-off. Benefits, there's nothing that's perfect. So at the end of the day, having that clinical mentality is necessary to pick the right trade-off. So I think that's important to the clinicians in the audience. They got to step up. They got to learn what they need to learn. And I think back, this is like 20 years ago, or is it more like 30 years ago, when they started MD PhD program, right? The idea is that clinicians need to be trained to understand basic science, or enough of the science, so they can translate. This is where we are now. But at the end of the day, you still need that domain expertise to make maximum use of the tools.
I think I
Thank you. We've got-
agree with 80% of that, but I do think data science is several magnitudes higher in terms of esoteric complexity and difficulty. So I do think that maybe not worry so much about who's in the driver's seat, but getting things done. You know, I think oftentimes people are debating who should get funded, who should get the resources, and I'm tired of all that. Let's just get projects done. I think Mimic is a great example. I don't think you worry about who's in the leadership role. Yeah.
I don't disagree with that, right?
Yeah.
There are always going to be bench scientists. There are basic scientists that a clinician can never take their job. And same thing in data science. There are really hardcore, deep, and necessary to advance data science as a field. And I
Yes.
think we need
Yeah.
experts there. But
I-
when it comes to
yeah.
using that as a tool in clinical care delivery, I think that's where
Yeah, well, certainly need to be in much better synergy, and I totally agree that the clinicians need to step up, because a lot of data scientists are actually telling me they're totally willing and wanting to. They don't get the clinicians' enthusiasm or passion about this, and perhaps those of us in this room can be the evangelists and get these things done. And I think of this as an analogy, like there's this orchestra and a symphony. We have amazing musicians, but we need some composers too, to write the music and conductors and make the whole thing work. Yes,
Thank
we have
you.
another
Yes, we have
question.
another question from Reza.
Hi, I'm from Wise IoT Solutions. I have a talk in the evening about remote monitoring. I want to know about if you can elaborate on the comments that you had about bring algorithms to bedside. This question is for the first talk, yes. What do you mean by bringing algorithm to the bedside?
So that means deploying the algorithms. Again, not just deploying it, but constantly recalibrating. People think that once you have an AI tool that your job is finished, and it's not. First of all, every AI algorithm needs to be recalibrated wherever you want to deploy them. Like if it was developed using data coming from Beth Israel, it's not guaranteed that it's going to perform as well when you bring it to even MGH just across the river. And you don't stop with deployment. You have to constantly evaluate whether it's still accurate over time. And I could tell you that an AI algorithm in a few years down the road is guaranteed to be not as accurate anymore, because as new tests and treatments are introduced, that will completely change the way it's predicting a clinical event or treatment response. So I think the job is just starting once you have a perfectly calibrated model. It will continue for years to come. And I think that's where monetization should come from. I don't think that data should be treated as a commodity, that you're going to be selling data. We're completely against that. I don't think that you should patent your algorithms, because algorithms are not going to be performing the same way over time. I think the monetization could come from deploying and constantly evaluating the algorithms at the bedside.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
we're also still in a nascent stage of using embedded AI and AI for IoT and wearable technology. So that's another tsunami of data coming. So we really kind of need to have, I think, an agenda and moving things forward. There's so many more sources of data outside the hospital that will be forthcoming that we need to handle.
May I add a little
Yep.
about algorithm to the bedside? When we start doing AI in healthcare, most people face the first problem is getting good quality data and large amount of data. And then the algorithm is probably like 20%, people say 5%, 10%, 20%. But then there's a big hurdle before you can really take it to the clinical setting, which is the clinical trial.
Yeah.
Requires sometimes by FDA, most of the time by clinicians, because clinicians only want to look at things that was strong support evidence, clinical evidence. So I think the next hurdle will be the clinical trials. And it takes a long time to set up the environment and a lot of money to actually conduct the trial to deliver them to enough subjects. So I think that's also another hurdle that we need to overcome.
But we can think of clinical trials differently. It took Stanford Apple, I should say, less than 24 hours to recruit 10,000 patients. So I think that's where AI can actually come in, is to change the mindset of clinical trials being such a burden. I'm going to save the last 2 minutes here for international comments from the audience, because it's such a resource that we have
we
in
do
the
have,
audience. Any
about-
international comments?
We have about 3 or 4 more questions.
If you have an international contribution or comment, we'll give you first
This gentleman's
preference.
been waiting very patiently, so I'm going to let him ask his question.
Okay.
I'm very international in mind. Okay. I wasn't born in the U.S. I came here. I've traveled quite extensively. So quite seriously, hi, I'm Moise Danielpour.
Okay.
I'm the director of pediatric neurosurgery at Cedars-Sinai.
Right.
I'm also a basic scientist. I run the pediatric brain tumor lab at Cedars, where we do tumor modeling, work a lot with single cell, seq, RNA, and data science, et cetera. But I find all this very interesting, and I kind of wonder from both sides of it. I've also started a software company that looks at logistics and hospital efficiency. I look at this on both sides of it, and I wonder about how commercialization of this technology is actually could hinder the development of this technology and its own Achilles heel, because in order for this, to get collaboration with clinicians, to get this information to the clinic, to get the data where you have outcomes to look at, an academic model actually works really well, sort of what we're talking about in Canada. I love this, the whole idea that the government is funding this, so you can do the academic overview of this and development of this, and then sort of the patents and licenses, et cetera, comes on the tail end and doesn't interfere with this exchange of information and the algorithms being open source so that we can then develop them further. And I kind of was hoping maybe you being in Canada and being up right in that and having a company as well, but developing this with government support, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think just getting back to that clinician, I mean, I'm not doing this by myself. There's a team of engineers and we have a team of policymakers that are together. I think it's really critical to put together the right team. So it's not just the engineer in isolation, it's not just the clinician in isolation, but you do need to have the policymakers and the people who are making decisions also involved and knowing about what you're doing so they can help promote and support what you're up to, and I think it's more than just an individual. Like I think the team, your AI team, is pretty critical. You also need an AI, what I would call our AI city. So our city is literally a whole corridor of people, from policymakers right down to the basic science level, who have a vested interest in pushing this forward. And I think being in that sort of microcosm also is very energetic and helps you move your projects, et cetera.
It's almost like concentric circles, right? You need
Yeah.
all the layers.
Yeah,
You
need
could have
all
a great
the
team
layers.
in a not so favorable environment. I've seen teams like that dwindle. So.
Right, and I think Canada has a great microenvironment, and I think speaking back to Anthony, it's just we tend to be kind of quiet and maybe we don't self-promote as often probably as we should, but we're doing some incredible things there.
You are, yeah.
Thank you. I think we have time for just one more question, but we're going to have a break in a minute so everyone that's got questions can come and attack you all on the stage.
Hi, Elise Crispin. I'm down in San Diego, but I split my time between San Diego and Mexico City. So my question is regarding standing up data centers internationally and how companies can best work in country across borders to do so, knowing that Amazon has a presence in some countries but not others. Middle East and North Africa utilize a lot of their own data centers in-house. So with the whole idea of cloud versus on-prem, how best should industry work in country to do so?
So for the events that we organize, we try to reach out to 3 stakeholders. Academia has to be there, the universities, the hospitals, the teaching hospitals. Industry is always there. So we try to promote really cross-pollination between academia, industry, and the third one is government. So I think for this field to move forward, there has to be cooperation among those 3 arms, really. And doing it in isolation, I think would be to the detriment of the progress of AI.
Yeah, you're definitely seeing much more interest compared to a couple of years ago to open up, data sets and data sources across, international lines. Personally, I'm working with a few Chinese data scientists on a cardiology project from a large Chinese hospital. And 2 years ago, we would not think that's kind of possible, but now it's readily available, and they're just looking for collaborative partners across international borders. So I think the next few years, you're going to see more and more people willing to support that concept of doing just good data science and do clinical medicine. And I think actually will rejuvenate some clinicians' perspective on doing research or make a contribution. You don't have to use, as much as you should in terms of doing something local. You can go global and work on some other data set if you're an expert in cardiology, let's say. So I see the mingling across international borders.